is a scanner anomaly that I wanted to do
Don't
on.
worry, this one's very short.
Yeah, it's relatively short. We'll probably tangent a little bit, but this is just sharing some information regarding these things in order to give a better understanding of why CIG made this decision. And
And that's
actually,
not dead.
yeah. So this question was asked on Spectrum on October 23rd, 2023, 6 months ago. First off, thanks for a great CitizenCon and congrats to CR and all the amazing devs for what they have achieved. I was, however, surprised that there was no mention of Quanta, it's Quantum, or the economy. When can we expect an update? Is Tony Z still alive? So the reply was by Balt CIG, which is Benoit, the chief technical officer for CIG, the guy you saw doing the server meshing presentation.
And the
I,
guy in charge of making quantum actually like work.
yeah, he
Z's the
the
designer, he's the engineer.
yeah, he's the engineer. This is what if you go back and watch the quantum presentation, Tony Z and one of his counterparts in Austin are presenting it. They're the designers, but they worked with I've been working with people from Montreal since the beginning.
Yep.
Martin and I forget there's another dev that they reference Martin something, and they even talk about this in this AMA that we're going to look at here in a second. So Benoit replies, "Here is a quick summary of my answer on that stream for you all," because um, he hopped in somebody's chat. I forget. Was it? He was in somebody's chat and talked about it. I forget where. The quanta simulation, and it's quantum. Come on, bud. The quantum simulation is in a good place at the moment, but lives in a closed system. So the simulation is running somewhere, and they can run it and play with it and tweak it and get data out of it. But it's not really hooked into the game right now. It is running in a closed system. Um, we want the sim to make a difference to your play experience, and so for the moment, have paused its development in favor of developing the gameplay systems. Key into that gameplay systems part. The game needs for the sim to hook on, economy and otherwise. The
And
server meshing,
otherwise.
yeah, economy and otherwise, because quantum is
That's
not
actually
just the
that's actually
economy.
s- yeah, that's actually something that not a lot of people understand. And ignore the VMPC subsumption MPC argument that is part of Quanta. There is more to Quanta bits, quantum system than just price fixing. It is much bigger than just that. It is the simulation side of resource management. I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Yep.
Like it is not just price fixing. And that needs to be talked about more when people start talking about quantum on Reddit and on Spectrum. So if any of you guys in chat just kind of leave a little note saying, "Hey, there's more to a quantum than just
Yeah.
economy."
That's why Tony Z did that second presentation. We're using bounty hunting, as an
Mm-hmm.
example, because there are all these services that are within the simulation that are part of it, besides just quanta moving goods around. Um,
Yep.
and generate. The biggest thing that quantum does is generate contracts. Um, and they use service beacons a lot, essentially as a surrogate for it. But it generates contracts that players and NPCs are competing to do. Um, it's
It
it's not
also
there
the
to
biggest
change
function.
commodity prices. It's there to generate a cargo hauling mission for you to move those commodities from where they're produced to where they need to go to produce something else.
Yeah, the biggest function for me is population control and
Mm-hmm.
what you're going to see. Its job is to flavor the universe realistically, or flavor the universe depending on what the universe is, not what designers want it to be. So when you walk into, or when you fly into a new part of space, or when you walk onto a landing zone, Quantum has decided, because of all the data it has around, what the mixture of NPCs, Shion, whatever you see, is going to be. How
Yeah.
many of them are factory workers? How many of them are high class citizens? How many of them just came off of work? How many of them are just waking up? That's Quantum's job, is to flavor the universe. That is my biggest thing about Quantum, and that's what I'm really excited to see. Uh, not the price fixing. Because every game has price fixing. Like every economy based game, every MMO has some version, some simulation that they run for price fixing. It's not new. Quantum was never needed to do that. It's all the other stuff and the depth of simulation they're going to get all this to work and then to use that data to flavor the universe. And like Trey said, like the contracts to make it both player and NPC, so PvE contract management.
Sorry, I'm actually going to pull up the Delta browser for the Shiny tracker, because the other thing is people think that that hasn't been worked on at all, and it's been worked on a lot. They just have paused development.
Oh,
Yeah,
they were working on that. Like basically, they've been working on that since Tony Z started.
Let's see,
Like,
where is it?
did he get in like 2013, 2014? I don't think he was there quite at the beginning, but he was there pretty early. But that was why Tony Z was hired. It was the quantum simulation.
Yeah, and so in order to, I mean, that was the end goal of all the research and the planning. But in order to make the simulation do what quantum does, that was the goal.
Yeah. His purpose was to make the systems that they now call quantum.
Yeah. So the gosh, where was I? So
Everyone seems to be like Tony C before my time. Yeah.
So
and he has been like,
yeah.
They haven't talked about him a lot, and I just hope that, well, I hope he's working because I would hate for CIG just to be outputting money for him to like be on the bench.
Yeah.
So,
and it's not A0. It's not that it needs server meshing. It's that with server meshing being brought in, a lot of these services that communicate with these servers are also what the quantum simulation communicates with.
yeah,
and we'll read about that here in a second.
It's a tangential requirement.
Yeah, it's a lot of those services are getting updates and refactors in order to work with server meshing now that they're finally implementing it. And so until those services are basically in a finished state for dynamic server meshing, they don't want to integrate quantum into those services and have to communicate with those if making changes to those services will break the simulation or break the simulation's ability to communicate with the game.
And on top of that, like the inventory needs to be ready for server meshing. But quantum also deals with the inventory because it has to put stuff in the inventory for things to be moved or primed or whatever. So not directly. Obviously, quantum is not inventory management directly. That's not how that works. But it has to flavor it. It decides what flavor the inventory is going to be, and the game, the DGS is probably where the logic actually runs to fill the inventory.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is a raider base, the quantum will say this area is owned by these raiders, and the DGS will say, okay, I'm putting in this loot table. That's kind of that thing. So now that we have inventory being moved off of the DGS, we can now finally have that system happen. And that has to go through all of the different services that interact with the actual gameplay, as he said.
Yeah, first point, have posits develop in favor of developing gameplay systems. So what we do, gameplay systems, that the game needs for the sim to hook on, economy and otherwise. The server meshing work, like we just talked about, also has a very large impact on how the sim communicates with the game state, and so have thus prioritized the other work in the short term, not long term, short term, until we can come around and make the simulation affect live gameplay and make a difference like we intended since the beginning. So, how the sim communicates with the game state. So the game state is what the servers communicate to us. The servers take the aggregate data from all the different services that are connected to it and share in order to communicate the game state to the client, the servers and the replication layer. So the best example for this is like right now they're doing a refactor of the mission system in order, they talked about it in the recent monthly reports and something we've known about They've had to refactor numerous systems in order for them to work with server meshing, because they have to the game. If you have a mission, like they split Santon right down the middle with two servers. And if you have a mission and you're on one server and you cross that line at the next server, they need that mission to carry over with you. They need that your missions to persist, so that way when you log out and log back in, your mission is still there if it's meant to be, if it's not like a timed mission. And so they're refactoring the mission service in order for it to work with server meshing. Well, if
Oh, interesting.
Quanta, but
Apparently, Zelfax says that there was an episode where they say that Quantum actually does decide the loot pool itself. That's not a
yeah,
locally
that
run
makes
BGS
sense.
thing.
Yeah,
Also, Arrow said, I'm just gonna read it as Arrow. I'm sorry. Said that couldn't they apply a manual approach before Quantum? Yes. If you read the monthly reports, the economy team is all they talk about. Is they're currently implementing a manual balance on the entire economy as we speak.
yeah, they're essentially setting a baseline, and that's supposed to come in 323, right? That's a 323 thing, isn't it?
Part of it. Part of it.
Yeah,
Um, there's a
it's a
lot to do,
multi-step part, but
and
yeah,
yeah,
the first step,
I think
yeah,
we're getting weapons, ammo, and a couple other things. I don't know if they've actually said, but we'll figure out in the month report that's supposed to be out in what, next week?
yeah, next or
Okay.
no, tomorrow. Wait, yeah, tomorrow.
Okay,
Hooray! Monthly report
tomorrow.
tomorrow. Yeah, but we'll cover
Woot!
the monthly report next week.
I did not look
Um,
at the this week in Star Citizen. I'm a
yeah.
bad human being.
So, but the refactor for the mission service is a great example of the how Quantum needs to interface with the servers in order to thus interface with us. Um, and they don't want to hook Quantum into the mission service and have it be generating missions only for all of that to break, and then no, if it's generating the missions for the game, and now the game is reliant on the missions from Quantum, and then that breaks because they introduce server meshing and the mission service doesn't communicate with the servers and server meshing appropriately, that would be bad. We would have no game, we would have no missions, no contracts, no nothing. And so until the dust settles from refactoring the services to work with server meshing, um, they don't want to tie in Quantum with all these different things, until they know what changes have been made, so that way they know what changes they have to make to the Quantum simulation to allow it to hook into those different services. And it's the mission service is just a good example because they've talked about it recently, but there's a lot of different microservices that the game runs that have been getting refactored for years now in order to get ready for server meshing. The mission service is just the most recent one that they've talked about, and most recent one they've been working on. If you played in the server meshing test, you'll know that your missions didn't work. They didn't cross from server to server because they hadn't. It's the server meshing test ran on a 322 build, not a 4.0 build that had that update, that updated mission service.
And Arrow then says again, a balance Naz is that is more frequent than once per patch. No, they're not. As far as we know, they're not planning on a active manipulation of the economy within the game until Quantum. Um, it's just not in the design. We've heard nothing on that. They don't. They've never planned, and they do say pretty frequently, maybe once a quarter, maybe once a year, whatever frequency. It's somewhere near there. That they don't want to touch the game at live, and they just mentioned early this year, last year, that they have no interest in policing the game. They are making systems so the game does it itself. So they're not planning on doling out bans and getting in there and cleaning up griefing and PvP, unwanted PvP, whatever it is. That's not their plan. Their plan is to completely hands off. They're taking the exact opposite approach, like the stark opposite approach of Helldivers. Helldivers has used to be just Joel. Now it's an entire Joel team of people who are in there tweaking all the knobs and very specifically bending the universe to the game masters or the game master team will, so that it created a very specific tailored experience for the players. Star Citizen is hit start, run away, see what happens.
Yeah.
It is.
The
They have not planned that.
I would say that so Tony Z was led this team, or part of his purview was this team as among others, and so Tony Z wasn't just working on Quantum. They had lots of things that they were working on. So here's the progress tracker for systemic services and tools. It is no longer systemic services and tools. It's the economy team, and they're like, this is the one thing that I'm interested in from the new progress tracker is seeing how the new teams breakdown works, because these things got divvied out to the economy team as well as other teams, and so I want to see where these things landed in terms and the dust settled. So these, the quantum simulation, the virtual AI service, all these different services are still being worked on, and they don't require the quantum simulation to work. These can still hook into the servers as it is in order for them to function and get tested. So I wouldn't be surprised if, along with creating the baseline for the economy, if they were also continuing to work on these services, especially like the things for
And I could see it.
bounty hunting.
I could see it going both either or way. Either they're using Tony Z because he is an economist. He is the guy the lawyers call, and not the lawyers, but the big firms call to make them a program to predict the economy so that they can make educated guesses about the economy. That's his job. So I can imagine that he's either working on with Quantum to simulate things so that they can build their baseline and then handing that data over to the devs to implement into the game, or he's continuing to work on the systems and nail down the algorithms and formulas that the game's going to use with the resource network and with the quantum simulation and with volumes and factions and things. Because when last time we heard of Quantum, they didn't talk about factions. They talked about 3 types of things: workers, pirates, and police. But they never said what happens when there's 2 different pirates and 5 different police. Well, 4 different police. Yeah, 4. So for Stanton, there are at least 4 gangs. There are 4 different securities places. Not to mention, we have a jump to Terra. So all the traffic coming from that, we have a jump to Magnus, we have a jump to Nyx, not Nyx. We have a jump to Pyro. And what was the other jump point? Magnus, Terra, Pyro.
From Stanton?
Yeah. Isn't there
Just
4th?
Magnus, Terra, and Pyro. There's 3.
Okay. I thought there was 4. So all of that traffic and their gangs and security stuff has to be thing. What happens when they mix? So like formulas need to be made. That is not a simple let me just if we have X amount of this and X amount of this happens. It's a lot of stuff needs to be written down. I imagine there's no shortage of work to run algorithms on all of this data to figure out what happens when stuff doesn't go to plan. What if the fire rats decide, hey, it's getting a bit too hot, as far as xeno threats being a bit too iffy. Why don't we just move to Stanton?
Floor bonnet, I will end you.
That's
rad.
The simulation has to be able to either account for it or have safeties on it to where gangs don't decide to migrate to a different place, which I imagine is what they will do, because they're still trying to get a theme in these systems. And if we're able to just clear out systems of gangs, then players win. And Chris Roberts is not one to let players win.
So yeah, the another good example of what the Tony Z and team would be working on right now would be the ATC service. Is another big thing that is having to get refactored for server meshing. So their work hasn't stopped. They're just not working on Quantum right now. They're working on other things that are needed in the short term that will allow for quantum to get hooked in later after server meshing is in a more complete state, with dynamic server meshing. But they worked on quantum. Here is the Shiny tracker via Shiny Hobo, who is able to pick out the raw data that is under the hood for the progress tracker, and the progress tracker publishes, and see what actually is being, how many people are being scheduled, how many tasks and such. And you can see that quantum was continually worked on from when the progress tracker started in January 2021, basically all the way through to Q3 2023 when the progress tracker ended. And this is when that announcement got made that they were pausing development. So there had been devs continually working on things for the quantum simulation. So they only recently paused work on it in favor of these other things. Now let's look at this quantum AMA. So the other dev that was doing the presentation with Tony Z for the initial quantum presentation in 2019, his name's Jake Muley. He did this AMA, or they did this AMA where he and some of the devs from the team up in Montreal answered some questions regarding quantum. So one of the big things is kind of telling. So I talked about how there's limitations for quantum, with server meshing, in that introducing server meshing is requiring multiple refactors of existing services that connect with the simulate or connect with the game, how the game is portrayed to us by the servers. The mission service, the ATC service, all these different things have to be refactored to work with server meshing. And that work has been ongoing for years. You can see that work in the teams that were assigned to server meshing. But in terms of gameplay, so we talked about the server meshing work and the services and how that the sim communicates with the game state, that the server communicates to us. What gameplay systems does quantum really need to be more fleshed out that it hooks into to be released? And the biggest thing to me is resource management. So if you read here, it says, will factory nodes on planets be physical locations in the PU? And if you remember the quantum simulation, they had all these different factory nodes where resources were getting shipped in from mines and places where mining was going on in order to produce power plants and weapons, what have you. And it says, for now, factories, refineries, so like refineries at stations, manufacturing nodes are all virtual entities that exist to spur traffic in the economic simulation and eventually generate service beacons. That's what they do. The whole point is for them to generate a service beacon, and that service beacon is to, hey, I purchased this much cargo or this much aluminum from here in order to make these power plants. I need you to bring it from there to here. That is the mission that that's meant to generate. But in the long term, we hope to link as many things that happen in quantum as possible to the actual player-facing game. So if you remember watching the quantum presentation, they talked about the recipes for these production nodes. It requires, this much aluminum, this much gold, whatever, plus this many ticks of labor in order to produce one power plant, one repeater, what have you. Well, all resource management is a recipe system. And so to me, this is saying that for these locations that, the location is physicalized, but these locations are going to be dependent on resource management for their function. And so in order for a distribution center to produce, maybe it's manufacturing, and maybe this is a distribution center that makes coolers. In order for it to make coolers, the resource management system has to be up and running. And so it has to have power. And in order to have power, it has to have fuel. In order for the the work to be occurring there. It has to have quanta there to do the labor. In order to make the finished component, it has to have X number of resources. And if you have ever played a colony management system, this is what you are seeing in terms of you're watching your RimWorld sim play out, and you see your little person bring over 5 bushels of corn, and then they have to turn that bushel of corn into um, you know a pie or bread. Well, they bring that bushel of corn over to the oven, and the oven has to have fuel, and they have to do the labor at the oven in order to take that resource along with the power at the oven in order to make the thing. Well,
So I'm gonna answer
that's
like a couple of things in chat.
go for it. Sorry, I
So
wasn't looking.
Iris, yeah, that's fine. Iris said there needs to be a difference between players winning easily and no effect. That's exactly what quantum is. But like I said, there either needs to be something written in for, let's say, the fire rats to be able to migrate, or a system to stop them from migrating out of the system. They will be able to push back, but only so far. But the game's supposed to be able to dynamically do that without interaction. Suddenly, distribution centers by Zelfax are more exciting. This is what me and Trey have been like seeing this entire time. It's like they're right there. They are hubs of quantum.
Yep.
And then Remco said, which I love the node idea because someone can have a job. Exactly. That's one of the points that they made in the Tony Z video. Just CIG has to make it so we don't have to proc the nodes, otherwise the players will gamify it. That is the foundational idea of quantum running not on the server. Is all of the places you could ever have resources be is simulated 24/7 somewhere else. So when you show up, you'll only be seeing the current live version of that simulation that's in the backend.
Yep. And this isn't just generate service beacons for moving cargo. If with resource management, if the distribution center or an outpost or whatever needs someone to do a job in order to produce that output that can generate a service beacon, you can go. The goal is for you to be able to go to that refinery and do whatever the task is at the refinery in order for it to refine raw aluminum into refined aluminum. Just as an example, to turn iron into steel, what have you. But if a player doesn't do it, a quantum or a quanta will do it. And we will be competing with those jobs to do those things. Same thing for mining. If you have a Shubin Interstellar owned distribution center and they are they require labor in order to produce the raw whatever mined resource, you can go do that and help fill that quota, or it will. Yeah,
they took our jobs. Oh my god,
they
that's
took
great.
our jobs.
That's great because they actually do.
I'm gonna turn that into a GIF. I'm gonna turn that into a GIF. I'm gonna do it.
Quantum, we're taking our germs.
But that's
Zelfrax. I'll see how it's pronounced eventually. Wonder if distribution centers become the future of player future halves of players. No, but maybe they might have halves. They've said absolutely nothing about players owning or renting them. They've specifically said these are for the on-site workers. Plus, we already have 3 other places to call home, city stations, and our own player-made bases. Yes, that rhymes. It was not meant to. I didn't really think of it.
But if you...
We don't need them. We could always set up an outpost, like a player-made base, outside the door of this facility, like or to drive away, maybe on a road or something.
But they do want these physical locations.
Hubs. Sorry, I read halves, not hubs.
They do want these production nodes to be physical locations. Obviously, like in the landing zones, you're going to have non-physical locations. Like there's going to be gobs of factories at, some. I'm sure I would be surprised if there are some that you can visit, say at like ArtCore, but a lot of them will be non-physical locations. But the the mining outposts on moons, your distribution centers, the regular player outposts, your refineries at stations, for fuel and refining mined goods. Those are physical locations that will have resource management systems, and the recipe for it to generate the resource or the output that it's there to make will include not only the receipt of raw materials, but also the use of labor, whether it's player or quanta, to do the task. In order to, they talk about it in the quantum presentation, it'll take X amount of ticks of it'll take 10 quanta, 60 ticks to make an output of 100 refined aluminum. Well, as a player, you could go and you could do whatever that task is at the refinery, terminal, to be part of that tick process in order to generate that refined aluminum, and you could get paid for that job. And that's something they've talked about in terms of resource management as well as in quantum. You're competing for those jobs. It isn't just competing for the opportunity to haul those goods back and forth. And down here is another question that further talks about what Naz and I were talking about with server meshing. Is there any tech needed to be, before implementing quantum, like iCache or server meshing? Oof, iCache. Or can it be implemented right now as in tier 0 and improve as we go forward? So Jake Muley, not Jake Acapella, says there are always compromises that we can make to get a majority of the benefit before all the necessary tech is in place. And we plan to do that as much as possible so players can begin to feel the benefit of the dynamic simulation. And they did start introducing some things that were quantum managed into...
Oh, your mic just died.
I turned it off because I sneezed.
Okay.
I didn't want to sneeze right in the mic. That would blow your eardrums. But they did start hooking some things up. But they further go on to say, server meshing and iCache will definitely help with this process, but our tech requirements are more on being able to read and write to other existing services already, like the shopping service, probability volume service, and new dynamic mission service, like we already talked about. Well, Quanta needs to be able to read and write, receive information and give information to those services. But if those services are being refactored for server meshing, it doesn't make sense for Quantum to hook into those until those services are at the at that more finished state, and you don't have to worry about them breaking. So let's. I want to finish this off. Finish off what Naz and I were talking about with resource management, in order to really cement this concept of Quantum really needs resource management in game for locations to be able to hook into those locations and be able to work with them in order to make them function as like living, breathing entities in the universe instead of just a piece of art. So let's hear about what resource management is really intended to do, because everybody hears resource management and they think about ships and engineering gameplay on ships. And that's
just
like...
Before you play that...
Yep, go for it.
Dale was saying, I hope they have large no build zones. So what would be the advantage of having your base next door to a distribution center?
Drive time.
The drive time.
Everybody,
where are you driving?
Everybody hates commuting.
Sure. But you're not...
I want my distribution center to have a really good walkability score.
But
I want to be able to ride my bike to work at the distribution center and go turn the knob that makes the refinery go.
So there's no real advantage of having close proximity to the distribution center, because either you're pulling stuff to it or you're taking stuff away from it or you're doing a job underneath it. Either way, there's no advantage to being in proximity. The only advantage you have is drivability. There's no cargo missions currently you can do with driving. So flying in is not, unless you're trying to be hostile, and if you're trying to be hostile, you don't want your base next door. Like, that's not a thing. I just walked over here from my next door neighbor's house. I'm gonna burn it down. Who do you think they're gonna look at first? You could. Remiko said you could, in theory, have a free-to-play player who make their own or who can't own a hangar or ship. I doubt they want to do that, but in theory, that makes sense. Like have a wow. People have been wanting no ship accounts for years now. They exist. You just have to spend $1,000 first. Because it's actually a not bug, but it's a quirk of the shopping system that semi recently they allowed anyone who spent more than $1,000 to not need a game package, aka a starter ship. So you can technically spend up to $1,000, get the concierge level, and then melt your entire hangar into store credit and not have a ship, but have a game package.
Oh, dang it. Where is that dang sneak peek
Maybe
that they sent
eventually-
out just the other week with the distribution center, that like high level view?
Oh, is the sneak peek the last sneak peek?
Was it the last week's or?
Yeah. Maybe eventually, but I imagine when you first build your base, larger buildings and hangars might not be cheap, but on being close might not allow you to depend on the sea infrastructure, which might be a refinery or larger cheap storage. This is all speculative. Yeah, everything we say, anything I say, anything Tree says, anything you say, it's all speculative. They gave us like no information what base building is actually going to be when they actually, because they didn't say they were going to start adding it to the game in January. They said they're going to start designing it into the game, or designing the feature Q1 of this year. So they are still in early stages of actually planning out base building. They know what they want it to do and generically what they want players to be able to do with it, but they have no idea what base building is. I imagine there'll be a lot of edge cases and things like no build zones, and maybe I don't know if they would do edicts for like you can't build size structures within areas. I mean, it would make sense if type of structure, so you can't do like, hey, this is owned, like this area and the area around it's owned by Shubin. You probably can't put mining bases down here. I love that shot. That shot is so good.
It is a really great shot. I'm just looking for the park and
Zoning
ride
laws, yeah.
for the people who like, you know, who ride
So
share.
if you go up the ramp on the bottom and then
Uh-huh.
swing left, there's a big hangar door. There should be a lobby in there.
Okay, so you pull your Ursa in there,
Yeah.
and you park in there and you store it for later. But like, where do you lock up your bike? You know, do you do
your
that indoors as
bike.
well?
I mean, if you keep following that road down next to those containers, it should be fine to hook it up to something over there.
Yeah,
It's behind a wall. It makes sense for pedestrian traffic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You
super
can
cool shot.
Probably go in there, get on the scaffold bit so you're not crossing the roads, and then get into the main building.
Mm-hmm. So
Shubin owns all of the air more than 200 meters above ground.
This
Air?
is from,
I don't think Shubin cares about air.
yeah. This is from CitizenCon 2952, so 2022, the Power Play presentation, and they have repeated this sort of commentary about the breadth of what resource management is meant to be, but everyone misses this because they talked about it in the engineering or resource management ISC afterwards, but
They talked about it at CitizenCon.
Mhm.
When they showed off, like, hey, this is the ship implementation. Everyone just kind of tuned out when they said that.
Yep. But so listen to this. We're even going to put on the closed captions so you can see.
Hi, my name is Dan Truffin. I'm Assistant Director for PU Content, and with Thorsten Leiman here today, we will be talking to you about something we think it will change the way Star Citizen functions and works, and how the players will play the game in the future, and that is resource management. Resource management is the underlying system that allows items to produce, consume, and store resources in the game. It is the digital representation of real-life cables, pipes, tanks, batteries, or anything like this that you can imagine.
It's the foundation of the ships, where you have certain resources like fuel and energy powering certain items on the ship, but it's also the system that will lie below any station or any vehicle, anything that you can imagine in our universe that actually requires a certain type of resource.
Resource management is not just a system that helps ships function. It is a thing that's integral to the functionality of the entire universe. It will be the way surface outposts function, underground facilities, space stations, landing zones.
Right there. Everything.
Yep. I mean,
Everything
they
is going to
basically
run
said
on the
twice,
resource management system. And what does Quantum do but manage the resource management system in terms of inputs, outputs, and making sure that there are jobs in order to be able to keep it running? So these resource management has to be tied into all these locations. And that they've also talked about player outposts. When you build your base, it's going to have a resource management system. And so in theory, your player base could, you could generate jobs that would be taken, by Quantum and allow Quanta to do those jobs, or allow players to do those jobs via the mission service. But the quantum simulation needs to be able to hook into these resource management systems for these locations in order for it to
Pasties,
do
all
its
the dead
job.
bodies, no questions.
But if these locations don't have these resource management systems, there's nothing for it to hook into. And so that's the gameplay mechanics that they're talking about. There's really, in reality, is the resource management system. Now, you can't look at resource management for all these places and be like, oh, okay, well, there's going to be size 5 power plants, and size 5 fuel tanks. That's not what they mean. They're talking about the code underneath that basically makes a recipe system for it to work and creates things that are interactable for players in order to interface with that system.
I imagine maybe even 1.0 we'll still have a power facility, let's say in Area 18, that is simply a point on a map that says that's where the power comes from, and that's how the resource network knows where that's from. I don't really see. Well, I guess it's kind of a building interiors question. Is very much a building interiors question. So we'll have to see with that. If power stations and refinery stations in locations, I mean, I know we have. Well, these are also going to be applicable for stations because it's kind of the same thing. Basically, location-based generation type things instead of on your ship. You have a power plant or a refinery plant on refinery ships, or shield plants with locations. It will be entire buildings that will serve that one function. So like a hydroelectric plant, that's an entire building, not a component. So I guess that is the biggest question. Like, will we be able to go there? Will we be able to see it instead of being able to see power plants on our ships? Will we be able to see the power plant that runs Area 18? And
Yeah.
I guess I kind of talked myself around to, it's not a question for Resource Network or 1.0. It starts and ends with the question of, is it going to be added with the building interior? The first pass of building interiors.
Yeah. And for things like the space stations, the landing zones, the UGFs, it doesn't have to be something that is a physicalized components. It is just the recipe system for that location that says in order for it to function, it needs fuel to make power, and it needs to have power in order to power the refinery that is at that location, and the refinery needs this much of this raw resource to convert into this refined resource, along with how whatever additives that they end up using for refinery gameplay and such. And then it also requires the labor along with that. That's the resource management system, is that it requires all those resources things needs to consume those things to produce something else, and it's not like but it's the same. The code for it works the same as the code for our resource management systems on our ships. It's the underlying code is the same, and they can apply it to a location just so that way the the player facing things that you can interact with, you have to pull this lever and turn this dial and put in this code to get the refinery to do this cycle of labor, or you have to drop off this many SCU into the freight elevator of antimatter fuel to keep the reactor at the distribution center running. But it'll generate the job in order for it to do that, but that's part of the resource management system. And so that's the hard part that people have separating from, okay, there's going to be a power plant and I need to go and use my pyro multi-tool on the size 5 power plant at the station. It's like, no. It's just the under the hood recipe system that will tell you to do this function at the at this kiosk or computer terminal or anything, along with
like,
bringing it resources.
It's kind of, if you've been to Providence at Orison, those tanks are locations. They're not components in your ship like a lot of other tanks or thrusters. I'm pretty sure the tanks are actually for the thrusters, possibly. I forget what they actually are. But instead of being a component that you just pull out and replace, there's terminals and there's an entire web of stuff on Providence to keep the platform running. They're not just little items that slotted into a spot. It's the entire floating module of the city.
And that's why they used it. I forget, and I should have looked it up for this, and I apologize. But you remember it was an ISC, I think they were talking about, where you would have engineering jobs to do maintenance on those things, and that's part of this system. In order to keep it running,
it was this last CitizenCon. They had to fix a radiation leak.
Yeah, but yeah, they've shown that that's the same as doing the maintenance on your ship, except for the thing that you interact with would be different than the thing you'd interact with on your ship, but it would perform the same function. You do this process in order for this this ethereal component to continue to function and operate at this tick rate to generate this much power, to generate this much coolant. I think if you remember from, let's see, it wasn't this it was the presentation this last year, and they showed us the web of the resource management system on the Hercules. Mm-hmm. I think it would be really cool to look and see what that web looks like for a space station like this. I think this is by Genie Point. Yeah, to have the overlay for that and see what that looks like, and what those interactive points are. Because they talked about that with the design of space stations. They don't have them in the game yet because they didn't put them in because they didn't make sense to put them in because they wouldn't have a function. But there would be essentially engineering rooms that you would have to go to do these jobs to keep the station running. And it's no different than doing the maintenance on your ship.
I think I've said this like more than anything I've ever repeated, but like they've said stations, one, are very undone. They're kind of waiting for the building interior tech. And two, the final plan for how big the interior of stations is going to be is there's going to be entire internal tram systems inside stations.
Yeah, they itty bitty right now. If you think about the amount of interior space that we interact with is just a small portion of the actual interior volume of this massive structure. Yep.
Yeah, if you've ever been able to glitch into the walls purposely or purposely or not purposely, and see how much of the space we actually use for walking around, it is almost nothing compared to the interior space of that little donut. Plus the ends, plus like even on the image that he has with the hangar flaps, whatever they're called, the hangars in them, not a lot of that space is actually taken up by those hangars. Plus you have the cargo deck, you have some other stations of security decks. Like, there's a lot of space.
the other reason is because that space is an object container. They need to
Space
be able
was
to,
smaller.
yeah, they needed to have server meshing at a point where they could potentially break up these interior spaces into different object containers as the population of players increased. Because that's the thing is if you have 1,000 players on a server and a couple hundred of them, congregate for whatever reason at by Genie Point or something like that. And when I say server, a shard, that you can't have everybody, all that a massive population of people in the stations as we have them now. They have to be bigger. So you can they've already started to add more hangar space and all that. There's going to be a lot more hangars added, more of these arms. They're going to get bigger both inside and out.
Yeah,
But yeah.
'cause if I think the best example of future-proofed game space is Riker Memorial Spaceport. Because if you go look at the design both on ArtStation and in game, the in-game one's a bit smaller. Okay, it's a lot smaller. But if you actually like pay attention to the landing platforms, when you take the train from Area 18 out to Rikers, you go to one platform. There's another platform in front of you that no one accesses. There are 2 more platforms on the other side of the highway. We only go to one of the not districts, but one of the, what are they called? Wings of Rikers.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look from the top, if you go up and look from the top, there is tons of space where there are no hangars or anything that they can very easily, because it's just big flat space, add in as many hangars as needed to fulfill the population that we're going to be having moving through Area 18. This game is set up to get big and dense.
Yeah. Yeah, landing zones, stations, all these things are meant to be able to scale, but to me, when Balt was talking, when Benoit was talking about the gameplay systems, the game needs for the sim to hook on, the quantum simulation needs to be able to communicate with these locations in order to be able to influence the recipe systems, that is the resource management for that location, in order to make it run, in order to generate the jobs and the contracts, whatever you want to call them, to keep it functioning. The refineries at the Lagrange point stations, the mines at the distribution centers, the factories on the planets. Even if it's just bringing resources to a freight elevator and dropping it off, well, that goes into that ethereal resource management system and contributes to that stored resource that that factory will run off of. That includes moving quanta, being able to move the quanta around to get to where the work is that they're going to be doing.
I'm
So
sending you 2 images.
Oh.
There's what we have in game. And there is what the concept art looked like.
Make this. Browser. Oh God, right.
So that's what we have in game. If you just take a second to look at it, there's obviously plenty of expansion, and those are Bengals sitting in the parking lot.
And those are
Not
there
singular.
just to be able to show scale. Obviously,
Yeah.
the Bengal isn't going to be landing. The Javelin isn't going to be landing. Blah,
Javelin.
blah, blah.
The only javelins we have on plants are ones that were unfortunately too infatuated with gravity.
But yeah, there's a lot of room for it to scale up and get muy grande.
And remember, Area 18 is also slated for a complete rework because the planet tech it's built on.
Yeah, all of ArtCore.
Yeah, all of ArcCorp is just completely going to be basically trash because they need to rebuild the buildings to support building interiors. Plus, they're going to be making bespoke buildings for building interiors and blah, 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 blah. So, Area 18 is a great example of one that was already built for scale, and that we had concept art saying they have bigger plans. Not to mention, if you take like the concept art lines up with also the most forgettable location that's not in the game, the Air and Halo gates.
But that's all that I wanted to talk about for this scanner anomaly in order to help everybody understand. And again, he doesn't specifically lay it out, but he does very much hint at, it's gameplay systems that it needs to hook onto. Well, what is that gameplay system? It's resource management. That's what I'm hanging my hat on, is that it's resource management, especially because that's being introduced now, and we know it's going to be at every location, and the quantum simulation is designed to hook into all those locations. But we also understand, why it was put on hold. Development was put on hold because of server meshing, because server meshing affects other microservices the game runs on, and in order to hook into those services really need to be more. They can't be at the state they're at right now before server meshing. They need to be in that post server meshing state for quantum to hook into them. So will the quantum simulation stay on hold indefinitely? No, it isn't dead. It isn't going anywhere. Tony Z hasn't, he could have died, who knows, but he hasn't given up on the quantum simulation. There are very good reasons it's on pause. And that's what we wanted to talk about is, the server meshing work, or the related work related to server meshing that we talked about in terms of those services, but also the gameplay system, resource management, and how resource management is so impactful. That's why this quote is so important. Actually, we didn't even finish listening to it.
Surface outpost function, underground facilities, space stations, landing zones, everything in Star Citizen will function using resource management.
So we will start with the smaller vehicles, and the gameplay for those smaller vehicles way more interesting than what we have right now. And from that, we can move on to like bigger ships, and finally the capital ships will have a real purpose in the world, and where it will have a real meaning that you have the multiple roles inside those ships.
It will drastically.
So they're starting off with ships, then they're going to move on to locations.
Yep.
But every location
I can
is going to have a resource management system running under the hood for it.
Yeah, and I can honestly imagine that we'll be seeing we'll be seeing quantum at this year's CitizenCon.
Yeah, I
might
wouldn't
make
be surprised if they gave us an update regarding this and talked about it more specifically, because people do want to know, and in order to dispel the rumors like we're trying to do right now.
We have, I think.
Pardon me.
I don't know if Jared has all of the things lined up for now to 4.0, or is it just his 3.23 lineup for videos? But I don't think we're gonna be like you said earlier. Like, they have everything they're working on for the next 12 months. So I imagine it's either closer to or at CitizenCon thing. We'll get an update on Quantum. I don't think there's much need to do it before. I don't think Quanta is going to get much of movement before 4.0's out the door, which means I don't think there'll be much implementation of it before CitizenCon.
Yeah, I when they get I don't think that they're going to need to refactor these services post 4.0 that they're talking about. I don't think they're going to need to refactor them again for dynamic server meshing after coming from static. So I think that the work for quantum and hooking it back in will pick up again before the end of this year, because those services will have been refactored, and work will start on resource management for locations, because they are aiming to release resource management for ships with 4.0, and it's all the ships. They've been refactoring everything because their goal is to get it out for every ship in the game with 4.0. But once that's done, then they really need to get to work on that for locations and expanding that out to all the locations in the game. Now, it isn't as much work because a lot of it is under the hood stuff versus, adding
It
component
depends on
bays and
how
such like that.
closely they're going to
but-
be working with the building interior team.
Yeah, but
Because
it's
that will really decide like how much they actually have to wait on them for like,
Yeah.
hey, we need a resource building. Well, here's your art for your resource building. We need this building, and after that they can go and actually run it. So basically, it'd be a
I think they'll
request,
do
like, hey,
the
we need all this
ethereal
art.
part first, and that way they can add in art assets later and tie the art assets into it. Because I think the ethereal part is the most important part, along with some of the the location things for doing maintenance. But
Yeah,
physicalizing
it depends on what their priorities are. Yeah.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if they got started with that work, immediately after 4.0 and saying, okay, now we're getting to work on building the resource management systems for distribution centers and outposts or something like that, or
Yep.
space stations and
Stations,
distribution
yeah.
centers.
Yeah.
So we'll keep an eye on it. I'm going to switch screens and we'll